They slept side by side every night, but it had been years since he touched her, not out of anger, not because of a fight, just silence. For Evelyn, the silence had become normal, the kind of silence that builds slowly, unnoticed, like dust in an old room. She had been married for over 35 years. She cooked dinner. He took out the trash. They talked about the news, the grandkids, the dog, but they didn't talk about what mattered. They hadn't kissed in more than a decade. They hadn't held hands since their youngest left for college. No one had ever hit anyone. No one cheated. No one yelled. So why did it feel so broken? Evelyn didn't know when the intimacy faded. She just knew that somewhere between raising a family and growing older, they stopped seeing each other. Not with their eyes, not with their hands, not with their hearts. And for years she thought that was just how marriage went after 60. Until one ordinary night something changed. A touch, unexpected, small, almost nothing. But it was everything. This is not a story about fireworks, it's a story about stillness, about waking up in a marriage that feels over and learning it doesn't have to be. If you've ever wondered whether it's too late to feel wanted again, this story is for you, because maybe your marriage isn't over. Maybe it's just waiting. Evelyn was 72 years old the day she walked into my office. She was wearing a pale blue sweater, her hair tied back neatly, with a softness in her face that reminded me of someone who had spent a lifetime listening, without ever being truly heard. She smiled politely, but her hands were folded tightly in her lap. She had been referred by her primary doctor, not for blood pressure, not for cholesterol, but because she had asked a quiet question during a routine visit that no one expected. Is it normal to feel this untouched? That word, untouched, stayed with me. Evelyn had been married for 38 years. Her husband Harold was 75, a quiet man, kind, she said, dependable, never raised his voice, never raised his hand, but also never reached for her. Not in years. Evelyn didn't come from a generation that talked openly about desire. She didn't grow up hearing that women deserved to feel wanted. She grew up believing that if a man stayed, worked hard and didn't cheat, you were lucky. And for a long time, she believed she was lucky. They had 2 children, a home filled with photos, a garden he kept neat, and a cat that curled up between them at night. But somewhere after the kids grew up and the retirement parties ended, the space between them grew colder. At first, she chalked it up to aging, then habit, then stress, then nothing. Until one day, while watching a movie alone in the living room, a scene came on, 2 older people just holding hands. No words, no sex, just connection. Evelyn burst into tears. She couldn't remember the last time someone held her hand like that, or if anyone ever had. She didn't want an affair. She didn't want someone new. She wanted Harold, but not the Harold who fell asleep in the recliner, the Harold who once danced with her in the kitchen, who used to kiss her forehead without needing a reason. And that's why she was here. Not because she wanted to leave her marriage, but because she feared she had already been left, quietly, invisibly, years ago. They weren't fighting. There were no slammed doors, no accusations, no nights sleeping in separate rooms, but that didn't mean everything was fine. Evelyn described her marriage as quiet, comfortable, predictable. They had dinner at 6, watched the evening news. Harold would fall asleep in his chair. She would clean up, turn off the lights and go to bed alone. He'd eventually join her. They'd lie side by side, separate bodies, separate thoughts, separate worlds. Evelyn couldn't remember the last time they had touched without needing something practical. A hand on the shoulder to pass a dish, a brief pat on the back after a funeral. Their intimacy had faded so gradually it was like watching colour drain from a photograph over time. At first she noticed he stopped kissing her goodnight, then the small compliments disappeared. Then even eye contact became rare, but life kept moving. The kids called, groceries had to be bought. The neighbour's dog barked, nothing seemed broken enough to fix, until it was too far gone to name. Sometimes Evelyn would sit at the kitchen table and try to replay their early years. When they met, Harold wasn't overly affectionate, but he made her feel noticed. He remembered her favourite songs. He reached for her hand in church. But something shifted after the kids were born. Responsibilities took over, schedules filled up, and gradually their connection was replaced with routine. The last time they had sex, she said, was nearly 14 years ago. It wasn't bad, she said quietly. It just disappeared, like we both forgot it was allowed. What made it worse was that Evelyn wasn't sure if Harold even missed it. He never brought it up, never asked if she needed more, and she never asked either. Why? Because after a while you begin to believe your needs are unreasonable, that maybe closeness is for younger people, that maybe love in old age is supposed to be distant. But every now and then the loneliness would break through, like the time she saw an elderly couple holding hands at the park, and it made her cry behind her sunglasses. Or when she overheard a younger woman at the pharmacy whispering about date night, and Evelyn felt a pang, not of jealousy, but of grief. It wasn't just about sex. It was about being remembered as a woman, not just a wife, a mother, a helper. Evelyn kept all of this to herself, not because she was ashamed, but because she thought no one would understand. Who complains about a husband who pays the bills, mows the lawn, and never yells? But Evelyn wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for presence, a touch, a word, a moment that reminded her she was still alive in her own skin. That was the silence that hurt the most. Not the absence of sex, but the absence of closeness, a kind of emotional distance that made her feel invisible in her own home. It was this slow, quiet unravelling that brought her to my office, not to get out of the marriage, but to find out if it was already gone. It's one thing to be alone, it's another to feel alone while lying next to someone who once made your heart race. Evelyn told me the hardest moments weren't during the day. They were at night. That quiet time after the dishes were done and the TV turned off, when the world slowed down enough for her thoughts to catch up. Harold would shuffle into the bedroom, say something like, "Long day," and settle into bed. He always turned to the same side, always fell asleep within minutes. And Evelyn would lie there, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the fan filling the silence. She could hear his breathing, could feel the dip in the mattress beside her, but the space between them felt like an ocean. That space had once been full of late-night laughter, whispered dreams, the warmth of legs brushing under blankets. Now it was just stillness. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that made her chest ache. There were nights she'd turn slightly, just to see if his arm would move toward her. It never did. Once she even tried brushing her foot against his. He shifted away, still half asleep, not angry, not rejecting, just unaware. That, she said, was the part that broke her. It wasn't that he pushed her away, it was that he didn't even notice she was reaching. To the outside world, Evelyn's life looked steady. A long marriage, a paid-off house, children who visited. But no one saw the silent ache that grew inside her bed each night. No one saw the way she tucked her hands under the pillow just to feel something warm. Evelyn didn't want fireworks. She didn't expect passion like in the movies. She just wanted to feel chosen, like someone still wanted to be close, like she wasn't just someone to sleep next to, but someone to reach for. Loneliness is often imagined as empty houses, empty chairs, silent phones, but the deepest loneliness, it's lying beside someone you love and feeling invisible. And Evelyn had been feeling invisible for years. Change didn't come all at once. It started with a question. At the end of our second session, Evelyn looked down at her hands and asked, "Is it wrong to still want to be touched at my age?" I didn't answer right away because I wanted her to hear the silence, that space between shame and truth. Then I said, "Not only is it not wrong, it's deeply human." That moment changed everything. Evelyn wasn't broken. She wasn't asking for too much. She was asking for what we all want: connection, warmth, presence. So we started small. No talk of sex, no pressure to fix the marriage overnight, just small steps to bring her back to herself. She began taking evening walks again, alone at first, breathing more deeply, feeling her body move, not to burn calories, but to remember it was still hers. She bought a new robe, not fancy, just soft, something that made her feel cared for when she wore it. She started playing music in the kitchen, old songs they used to dance to back when they still looked at each other with curiosity. And most importantly, she began speaking gently, openly to Harold, not with blame, but with truth. One evening, while he was reading the paper, she said, "I miss being close to you." He looked up slowly, said nothing for a moment, then nodded quietly. That might seem small, but for Evelyn it was everything, because acknowledgement is the first crack in the wall. A week later he surprised her. They were watching television in bed as usual, nothing special on, just background noise. And then, without a word, Harold reached out. His hand found hers under the blanket. Just a simple touch, no agenda, no explanation. His hand was warm, hesitant, but it didn't pull away. Evelyn sat still, afraid to move. Not because she was scared, but because something sacred was happening. She later told me, "I didn't cry then, I just held his hand, and for the first time in years I felt real." That moment didn't solve everything, but it was a beginning. Sometimes the first step back to intimacy isn't passion or romance, it's a hand reaching for another, saying without words, "I still see you." And that's where their healing began. After that night, the night Harold held her hand under the covers, something shifted. Not dramatically, not overnight, but something softened between them. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. It became their new, quiet ritual. Each night, as they lay in bed, Harold would find her hand. And Evelyn began to sleep a little deeper. She started to feel like the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was restful, safe. But Evelyn knew one gesture wouldn't heal 3 decades of distance. So, she kept going. She didn't wait for Harold to change everything. She started changing how she showed up, first for herself, then for him. She began wearing perfume again, just a little, dabbed behind her ears. The same one she wore when they first met. She found old photos of their early days, honeymoon snapshots, picnic afternoons, blurry Christmas mornings, and left a few on the nightstand. Not to remind him of what was lost, but to remember what they had once shared. She invited small forms of touch into their daily lives, a hand on his shoulder when she passed behind him in the kitchen, a brush of her fingers across his arm while handing him the remote. At first he looked surprised, but not uncomfortable, and little by little he responded. He began sitting a little closer on the couch. His good night became slower, quieter, more intentional. One afternoon, while she was pruning roses in the backyard, Harold came out with 2 glasses of lemonade. He handed her one, looked down and said, "I've missed this." It was the first time he'd acknowledged anything beyond routine in years. Evelyn didn't need long speeches. She needed these moments. They began taking walks together again, just to the end of the block and back. They didn't talk about deep things. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, but their arms brushed and neither of them pulled away. She told me, "It's not like we became young again. It's more like we stopped feeling old." There was still no rush back into sex. That wasn't the goal. The goal was something far deeper, emotional intimacy, and from there physical closeness found its way in, gently, naturally. They started sitting on the same side of the dinner table again. They started lingering over coffee. They laughed more. And one morning Evelyn woke up to Harold stroking her hair. No words, just a slow, deliberate gesture. Her eyes welled up. That was the first time in nearly 15 years she felt his touch without needing to ask for it. And for Evelyn, that was more intimate than anything else. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the woman who made lists and folded laundry. She was seen. She was wanted. And Harold, he wasn't just the man who slept beside her. He had become her companion again, not just in habit but in heart. Sometimes it doesn't take a grand gesture to change the course of a relationship. Not a second honeymoon, not couples therapy, not even a long conversation. Sometimes it's just one touch. Evelyn said it best. When he reached for my hand, it felt like someone opened a window inside me. That small act, simple, hesitant, broke through years of quiet, not because it was perfect, but because it was intentional. For the first time in a long time, Harold saw her, not the version of her who managed the house or remembered the birthdays, but the woman who once made his heart beat faster, the woman who still wanted to be held. That's the thing about intimacy, real intimacy. It doesn't start with the body. It starts with presence, with paying attention. A touch says, "I remember you. I still care. You matter to me." And when you've gone years without it, that kind of touch feels like rescue. Many people assume that after 60, 70 or even 80, the desire for connection fades. But it doesn't. What fades is the belief that it's still possible. People stop reaching because they think it's too late, because they've accepted distance as normal, because no one ever told them, you can begin again. Evelyn and Harold didn't become a different couple overnight. They didn't turn into newlyweds, but they became something just as powerful, two people willing to see each other again. And it all started with one hand reaching for another in the dark. That's the power of a single moment. Not to fix everything, but to remind you that healing is still possible, even after years of silence, even after decades of going through the motions, even after you've forgotten what closeness feels like. Sometimes one touch is all it takes to start remembering. Evelyn didn't expect miracles. She didn't want to rewind time or turn her marriage into something it had never been. She just wanted to feel connected again, to feel like a woman, not just a wife, to feel like her presence mattered, not just her duties. And slowly, quietly, that's exactly what began to happen. They didn't talk about fixing their marriage. There were no grand apologies or emotional breakthroughs, but the way Harold poured her coffee changed. The way he looked at her when she walked into the room shifted. The way they sat on the couch, closer, more relaxed, said more than any conversation could. One day, Evelyn opened the bedroom drawer where she kept old notes and photos. Tucked behind an envelope was a letter Harold had written decades earlier, during their first year of marriage. It was short, simple, but it ended with, I hope I never stop reaching for you. She placed it on his nightstand that evening. The next morning it was gone, and that night when they climbed into bed he didn't say anything. He just reached for her hand, kissed her fingers, and closed his eyes. That was it. That was everything. Evelyn told me that love in this season of life isn't about intensity. It's about intention, about choosing to see each other, even when the world says you're past your prime, about showing up with softness, even when the years have made you hard, about choosing presence over perfection. What changed was not who they were, but how they paid attention. They began to treat touch as something sacred again, not rushed, not obligated, not forgotten. And for Evelyn, that was more healing than any advice or article or expert ever could be. Evelyn's story isn't rare. It's just rarely told. There are countless marriages that look fine on the outside, stable, long-lasting, respectable. Yet inside, they're filled with distance, silence, and unmet needs. But here's the truth she came to understand. A marriage doesn't fall apart only through conflict. It can slowly dissolve through absence, through forgetting to notice each other, through years of unspoken needs and unanswered touch. And even when everything feels over, even when it's been decades since a kiss, or years since a hand was held, intimacy is not gone. It's waiting. Waiting for someone to reach across the space, to say with a look, or a hand, or a whisper, I still choose you. Evelyn taught me that the greatest form of intimacy isn't sex, or even words. It's presence, being there, not out of duty, but out of care. The lesson isn't just for couples who've been together for 40 years. It's for anyone who has ever felt forgotten in the middle of something that was supposed to feel safe. It's for anyone wondering if their quiet marriage is the end of connection, or just a pause, because it only takes one moment of courage to open the door again. One quiet truth spoken aloud, one touch offered without expectation. Evelyn didn't just save her marriage, she saved herself from a lifetime of believing she didn't deserve to be seen, held, or wanted. And that might be the most powerful kind of love there is. If you've been living in a quiet marriage, where the conversation flows but the closeness is gone, this story is for you. If you've stopped expecting to be touched, to be seen, to be desired, this story is for you, because age doesn't take away your need for connection, it doesn't erase your worth. And just because years have passed without intimacy doesn't mean it's too late to feel it again. You don't need a perfect partner, you don't need dramatic change. You just need one honest moment, one act of softness, one decision to reach even if you're not sure what will happen. Start small, hold their hand, play that old song. Say the thing you've been holding back, gently, truthfully, not to accuse but to invite, because sometimes healing begins not in a breakthrough, but in a breath, a glance, a simple touch, in the quiet of a shared bed. You are not too old to feel love again. You are not too far gone to be wanted. Evelyn didn't wait for the perfect moment. She chose to believe that it wasn't over, not yet. And that belief, that tiny act of courage, gave her something she thought was lost forever. Closeness. Let her story be a reminder. Your story is still being written, and it's never too late for one more chapter of love.